All right, today we're going to break down the story of Hurricane Katrina. It's one of the most destructive and infamous storms in American history, and there's so much more to it than just the weather.
Think about that number for a second. 80%. In August 2005, after the storm had passed, that's how much of New Orleans was completely submerged in floodwater. It's almost impossible to picture.
So how on earth did this happen? Well, the scale of this catastrophe wasn't just about one big storm. It was this absolutely fatal combination of nature's power, a city's really unique geography, and some critical, tragic engineering failures. So let's dive in and break down exactly how this perfect storm came to be.
To really get this, our story has to start not in the city, but way out over the warm waters of the Atlantic Ocean. That's where all the ingredients for this disaster first started to mix.
Okay, so here's the play-by-play of how Katrina went from just a simple weather system to an absolute monster. After a quick run over Florida, it hit the Gulf of Mexico, and those super warm waters acted like high-octane fuel. It caused the storm to just explode in strength, rapidly intensifying into the most powerful kind of hurricane there is.
And at its peak, we're talking about a true force of nature. With winds whipping at over 250 kilometers an hour, this Category 5 beast set its sights directly on the U.S. Gulf Coast.
Okay, so we've got this monster storm barreling across the Gulf. Now, let's turn our attention to the city right in its path. You see, New Orleans wasn't just unlucky. Its very geography, combined with a century of human changes to the landscape, pretty much made it a disaster waiting to happen.
If there is one single thing you need to understand about the city's geography, it's this. This simple idea is central to the entire story. New Orleans is essentially a bowl.
So why is being a bowl so incredibly dangerous? Well, first off, a lot of the city is literally below sea level, and it's surrounded by water. To make things even worse, Louisiana's coastal wetlands, which are like a natural sponge for storm surge, have been disappearing for decades. That meant the city's only real protection was a system of man-made walls, called levees. This creates this all-or-nothing situation, because, and this is the key part, once water gets into that bowl, it has no natural way to get out. Now, the authorities, they knew the danger was real. They issued a mandatory evacuation order, and a lot of people did get out. But thousands of residents, often the most vulnerable people, without cars or money or anywhere else to go, they simply couldn't leave. They were stuck. Then, on August 29, 2005, the storm made landfall. And in that moment, the city's absolute worst fears were realized. This is when the natural disaster turned into a full-blown, man-made catastrophe.
You know, the biggest threat from a major hurricane often isn't just the wind or the rain. It's this incredibly powerful force called a storm surge. As Katrina was churning out there in the Gulf, its winds were pushing this massive wall of seawater right towards a coastline that had already lost so much of its natural protective wetlands.
And right here is where we see the fatal mismatch. Now, Katrina had weakened to a Category 3 storm by the time it hit land, but it was still pushing a storm surge with the power of a Category 5. The problem? The city's defenses were only designed for a Category 3. And it wasn't even one single system. It was a patchwork of walls built by different groups over decades, all to different standards. It had never been designed to handle an assault like this. This was the core engineering failure at the heart of the disaster. The levees were simply no match for the water. And the result? Levees all over the city failed. And that brings us right back to that staggering number, 80%. The bowl filled up with terrifying speed, trapping people in their attics and on their rooftops as the water rose meters deep. So the storm itself passes. But for the tens of thousands of people left behind in that flooded city, the crisis, the absolute nightmare, was only just beginning. Now, you've probably heard about the Louisiana Superdome. Thousands of people went there, following official advice, believing it was a safe haven, a structure built to survive a hurricane. But the reality inside was just desperate. It was dangerously overcrowded, sanitation completely broke down, and basics like food and clean water ran out almost immediately. It took days for any significant help to get there, and the immense suffering was broadcast live to a completely shocked world. But even in all that chaos, even with all the failures of the official response, there were these incredible acts of heroism. Emergency services, especially the U.S. Coast Guard, launched just massive rescue operations, using helicopters and boats to pull thousands and thousands of stranded people from the floodwaters.
So, what did we actually learn from one of the deadliest and most expensive disasters in American history? Well, the aftermath kicked off a long, painful process of rebuilding and, hopefully, reflection.
I mean, the final toll of this disaster is just staggering, as you can see here. More than 1,800 people lost their lives. The economic damage was over $81 billion. And for thousands of families, their homes, their livelihoods, everything was just washed away. So in response, a massive engineering project had to be undertaken. $14 billion were poured into rebuilding and strengthening over 220 miles of levees and floodwalls, all to make them bigger, stronger, and hopefully more resilient.
But the legacy of Katrina, it goes so much deeper than just rebuilding walls. Yeah, it led to better forecasting and evacuation plans. Some of the hardest-hit neighborhoods were actually turned into green spaces to help absorb future floodwater. But it also had these other effects, like a huge spike in insurance costs and a real hit to the city's vital tourism industry.
And this leaves us with a final and really crucial question. With extreme weather becoming more and more common, the tough lessons learned from New Orleans are more relevant today than ever. It forces all of us to ask, are we truly ready for the next one?